This is the business of pop culture, where we explore the intersection of entertainment, media, and consumer engagement. Hi, Julia. Today we're going to be talking about Dungeons and Dragons. Is that right?
Yeah, we've got a feature movie coming up called Dungeons and Dragons Honor Among Thieves. It's been in limited release in the UK and US since the 25th. It's going global on the 31st, which is when our video publishes. And it's a feature film based in the cinematic universe, if you will, of the role-playing tabletop game Dungeons and Dragons.
I mean, I'm sure everybody knows what Dungeons and Dragons is, but maybe you want to explain for those who aren't familiar and why you think this is an important trend at the moment.
Oh, absolutely. Right. So Dungeons and Dragons is a tabletop role-playing game that was first released in 1974. So what's a tabletop role-playing game? It's basically a social game that is played in a group of friends, either online or literally sitting around a table together. Each participant in this group creates, controls, and then plays, basically inhabits a fictional character in an involving story that follows the rules that were originally created by games like Dungeons and Dragons. One of the players in this group acts as the game or dungeon master, who's the host and the facilitator of this entire game. And that person plans a story, or they can present one from sort of pre-printed books released by Dungeons and Dragons. They lay out challenges and quests and characters that their friends will meet as they play along, and they build in game elements like, say, for instance, a fist fight. When that happens, players have to roll certain numbers to determine whether they triumph or fail in their endeavors. They just interact with each other while they do this. They talk to each other, they're creating their own dialogue impromptu, and they're making choices collectively. And it's really a storytelling improv session.
Yeah, and I mean, as you say, this has been going for 50 years. It's an ongoing success story. So what is it that makes it so successful?
Well, A, it's fun to play in a sort of, hobbyist, personal at-home experience, the equivalent of, say, an unwired computer game. But it's also really fun to watch other people who are actually proficient storytellers do this. And that's possible because actually Dungeons & Dragons creative license lets people create their own experiences based off this content. So for instance, there's Critical Role, which is a very popular American web series that's been around since 2015. And that has voice actors play Dungeons and Dragons together over 300 episodes. And parts of their adventures have actually been adapted into an animated series for Amazon Prime called The Legends of Vox Machina.
So how does this work commercially? How is the money being made?
You know what is really interesting? So Dungeons and Dragons has previously run under what is called an open gaming license. That's sort of a public copyright system that outlines exactly how fans and third-party publishers are permitted to make and monetize content that's built off of the core idea of Dungeons and Dragons. So the long story short here is that it's perfectly legal for people like Critical Role to make their own stories and for people on Etsy to create their own dice for the game, figurines, character names, costumes, anything you might need to create a really fun gaming experience, so long as they don't use characters or settings or weapons or anything that the Dungeons & Dragons publisher, Wizards of the Coast, who are owned by Hasbro, which probably, rings more of a bell, have released themselves in books and collateral materials. And that's kind of what's kept this IP alive over the last 50 years. And now this is coming to a sort of mainstream storytelling creative head with the aforementioned Dungeons & Dragons Honor Among Thieves feature movie. There's also a TV series in planning currently with Paramount. So it's going to be a really interesting year for Hasbro. There was a huge dust-up in January when a potential new license for the whole of the Dungeons & Dragons commercial property leaked to the public. And that really basically would have redrafted the community rights as they exist right now and rebalanced revenue share towards Hasbro and Wizards of the Coast through royalties, and also largely cut off projects like videos, storytelling, and gaming, and really just mostly allowing that kind of cottage industry, Etsy hobbyist creator to coexist. I think they've now released the core idea of Dungeons and Dragons as a Creative Commons license, and I'm pretty sure they're currently working out how they can find the middle path with this community that made that whole entertainment property what it is and kind of keep a healthy fan relationship going.
Do you think that redrafting of the license coincided with the movie coming out? Was that a coincidence, or was there something more nefarious going on?
I think it's just part of like the wider thrust we're seeing out of actually, especially interesting enough, toy giants trying to add the IP, the sort of intellectual property narrative of their product. Hasbro is kind of maximizing on their gains there. And also we're seeing really interesting moves from Mattel, who have literally dozens of deals kind of in development and production in Hollywood now to turn the intellectual property that surrounds their toys into entertainment content. Most famously, the Greta Gerwig Barbie movie coming this year, which I'm very excited for. People have made up their own stories with the toys that they loved as children, and now we're just kind of seeing the commercialization of that. And I think our key takeaway here, especially with Dungeons and Dragons as a case study this year, will be that it's really interesting to see how a fandom that has existed primarily among its community creators is now going to sort of retrofit that kind of mainstream interest.
That reminds me what you're saying there about toy IP, that there was a quite funny video that went around with some comedians pastiching the Hollywood Reporter's Actors Roundtable, where actors get together and discuss their craft. And this particular one had actors very, very excited about playing various people in the Slinky movie universe.
I am voicing Stairs in the upcoming Slinky movie.
No way! No. You're gonna be in Slinky?
I'm gonna be Stairs.
That's
I think it
Oh
sounds
my
so.
goodness.
How crazy does that sound?
So yeah, I think, obviously we're going to be seeing a lot more of this if things like Dungeons and Dragons are a success, and Barbie obviously too. Is this a good thing? I'll leave that up to our audience, I guess. Anyway, Julia, thank you so much for talking to us, and I will see you next week.